9 years ago, my own father looked me dead in the eye and told me I would never amount to anything. Last year, Forbes put my name on a list of the richest self-made people in America, and my family walked back into my life, never once imagining how carefully I'd kept score in the years between. What happened next changed all of our lives. Stick with me to the end, because if you've ever given everything to a family that handed it all to someone else, this story is for you. And if it touches you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what my family did next. My name is Kiara Freeman. I'm 33 years old, and today I sit on the 41st floor of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower in downtown Houston, in an office with my name on the door. From the outside, people look at that and assume I must have grown up believed in, encouraged, loved without condition. The truth is very different. For most of my life, I believed that if you worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and gave enough of yourself away, love would eventually find its way back to you. I was wrong about that, but I didn't learn how wrong until the day my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I was sitting at my desk when my assistant burst in without knocking. "Kiara," she said, breathless, "Forbes just released the list. You're on it, number 87. 87. Self-made. Among the richest Americans in the country. Sit with that number for a second, because in a few minutes, I'm going to take you back 9 years to a kitchen in Houston's 3rd Ward, back to the exact sentence I just told you, the one my father said to me before any of this existed. I want you to hear it the way I heard it that day, at 24 years old, with no office, no list, nothing but a kitchen table and a father who'd already decided who I was. Because what happened after that Forbes cover came out wasn't the reunion I dreamed of. It was an ambush. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why I kept a certain folder locked away. One that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the truth. Now, let me take you back. 9 years ago, I was 24, sitting at a scratched-up kitchen table on Live Oak Street in 3rd Ward. The linoleum curled at the corner near the stove. A ceiling fan wobbled overhead, clicking every third rotation. A sound I'd grown so used to that I barely noticed it until the silence after my father spoke made that click the loudest thing in the room. My father, Terrence Freeman, was 52 then. Broad-shouldered, thick through the middle, a receding hairline with just a ring of gray at the sides. Eyebrows always drawn down like the world owed him an apology it hadn't paid yet. My mother, Monique, 48, sat beside him, smoothing the same wrinkle in the tablecloth over and over, the way she did when she was nervous. Rain had been coming down over Houston since supper, tapping the window above the sink. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at nothing. I'd just told them I wanted to use the fund my grandmother, my daddy's own mother, had set aside for me. 2 years before she passed, she'd put my name on 2 things: a small college account, $48,000 saved dollar by dollar from a lifetime doing hospital laundry, and the deed to her own house, right there on Live Oak Street, the same one we were sitting in. She wanted her granddaughter to have both a way forward and a place to always call home. My father laughed. Not a warm laugh, short and ugly. "A black girl with no direction in life isn't going to make anything of herself," he said. "Don't go dreaming." Something in my chest went still, like a held breath that didn't know when it would be safe to let go. 3 weeks later, I learned they'd already emptied the college fund, every dollar. Not for my education, for my younger brother, Lamar, 20 years old, who wanted to open a barbershop on Dowling Street. The shop closed in 7 months. That same week, I found out they'd sold the car I drove to my night shifts near the University of Houston. The money paid for Lamar's wedding to a woman named Shanice Carter. I wasn't invited. I found out from Facebook, a photo of my brother in a rented tux, 43 comments, none of them mine. Because nobody had thought to tell me the wedding was happening at all. That night, I stood outside my apartment in the rain, backpack soaked through, and made myself one promise, quiet enough that the rain nearly swallowed it. 9 years from now, you're going to see me in a way you never imagined possible. What nobody in my family knew was that I'd already started building something small and stubborn inside myself long before that night. During my last 2 years of school, I worked the night shift at a restaurant on Westheimer Road and quietly wired every dollar toward a credit card balance my brother had run up in both our names, a debt I hadn't known existed until the collection calls started. I never told a soul. There was one more thing weighing on me that night. Earlier, while packing up the last of my things, I saw my mother's phone light up on the counter. I wasn't trying to look, but the message was right there, glowing. Don't let Kiera find out there's more from your mama. Just let her think there's nothing left. I picked up that phone and slid it into my backpack instead of putting it back. That was the night I started keeping things. Not out of anger alone, but because some part of me understood the truth in this family had a way of disappearing unless somebody held on to it. I moved into a 500 square foot studio near the University of Houston campus with a mattress on the floor and told myself this was temporary. I didn't know yet it would take 9 years. I didn't know yet what next would even look like. I only knew that I was done asking my family to see me. From now on, I was going to build something so undeniable they wouldn't have a choice. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, keep listening, because what my family did next and what I quietly did in return is only just beginning. The first 2 years on my own, I lived on almost nothing. My studio near the University of Houston had one window facing a parking lot, and some nights the only light in the room came from my laptop at 2 a.m, spreadsheets glowing while the city slept. I remember one night in particular, not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. Rain was coming down soft and steady against the window, the kind that doesn't stop long enough to notice starting or ending. I'd made rice and eggs for the 3rd night in a row, eaten it standing at the counter because I hadn't bought a chair yet, and sat down afterward with my laptop and a legal pad, teaching myself the difference between a balance sheet and a cash flow statement from videos I watched with the sound low so I wouldn't wake the neighbor through the wall. I remember thinking very clearly, nobody is coming to save this. It's just you. It wasn't a sad thought by the time it finished forming. It felt more like a door closing gently and another one opening somewhere I couldn't see yet. I didn't know that night what any of it would become. I only knew I intended to keep going. Every few weeks my mother called, never to ask how I was doing, only, Lamar needs a little more capital. How much can you send? I stopped sending anything. By my 3rd year alone, a letter arrived that made my hands shake before I finished reading it. I remember exactly where I was standing when I opened it, in the doorway of my apartment, keys still in one hand, mail in the other, groceries balanced against my hip. The paper felt too official for my hands, the kind of letterhead that makes your stomach drop before you've read a single line. My parents had used my name, without asking, to co-sign a $65,000 loan to bail Lamar out again. I set the groceries down on the floor right there in the doorway and read it twice, then a 3rd time, my mouth going dry before I even took my coat off. I hired a lawyer, got my name removed dollar by dollar, and pulled back hard. No more money, no more favors, barely a returned phone call. I told myself it was over between us. It wasn't, not completely. Family has a way of finding the cracks, even when you've sealed every door you know how to seal. While gathering bank statements for my attorney, I found a string of texts between my father and a private lender named Mr. Ellis. Just keep my daughter's name on the paperwork. If anything goes wrong, she'll be the one who has to pay for it. I took a screenshot and saved it where no one would think to look. I remember sitting very still at my kitchen table after I found it, laptop screen glowing in an otherwise dark room, feeling something colder than anger settle into my chest. The specific, quiet cold of understanding that my father hadn't just failed to protect me, he'd calculated, in writing, exactly how much of the fallout he expected me to absorb. 2 years later, Lamar and Shanice had twins. They called, the first time in over a year, and asked if I could come help out for a few days. I said yes, because whatever else was broken in this drama family, I loved those babies before I'd even met them. I stayed 3 weeks. The house smelled like formula and lavender baby wash, and there was always a small, warm weight in my arms somewhere. First the boy, then the girl, then both at once when Lamar was too tired to lift his head off the couch cushion. I learned the particular hitch in the girl's cry that meant she was hungry versus the longer, more insistent wail that meant she just wanted to be held. I hummed the same tune my grandmother used to hum to me, the one with no real words, just a low rise and fall, and found that it worked on both of them almost every time. Cooked, changed diapers at 3 a.m, rocked 2 crying infants back to sleep while their parents slept down the hall. Some nights I'd sit in a nursery rocking chair with the lamp off, just the soft blue glow of a nightlight shaped like a moon, and let myself feel, for those few private hours, like I belonged to something. One morning, Shanice came into the kitchen, arms crossed, and said, flat and cold, "We found a nanny. You can head home now." No thank you, no goodbye. I remember the exact sound of the coffee maker finishing its cycle behind her as she said it, an ordinary domestic click that made the moment feel almost absurd in its casualness, like she'd just told me the mail had come. I looked at her for a second too long, waiting for something to soften in her face, and it never did. Looking back, I understand now that her coldness that morning wasn't really about me at all. It was the first sign of a woman already calculating her own position in a family she'd married into, deciding early which allegiances might cost her later. I didn't see that yet. I only felt the door close, quiet and final, the same way it always did in that house. Around that time, I was still consulting part-time for a logistics firm while building the earliest version of my own company, a small fintech platform helping Black business owners access capital that banks routinely denied them. The idea hadn't come from nowhere. It had come from watching my own family drown in debt none of us understood how to read, watching lenders speak a language designed to keep people like us confused and grateful for scraps. I built the first version of it on nights I should have been sleeping, telling myself that if I could just help one family avoid what mine had done to itself, some of this would have been worth it. My father heard about it through a cousin. His response traveled back to me secondhand. A girl in this family starting a company? She'll probably go bankrupt, just like her brother. The following year, my mother had a minor stroke. The doctor said she needed someone home full-time for 6 months. At that exact moment, I'd been offered a corporate role in California that would have tripled my salary and put me years ahead of schedule. I turned it down. I sat with that decision for exactly 1 night before making it. 1 long, sleepless night on my apartment floor, offer letter in one hand, phone in the other, waiting for a call back from the hospital that never quite came fast enough. I didn't call anyone for advice. There wasn't anyone left to call who wouldn't have told me to think of myself for once. And some part of me already knew I wasn't going to listen to that advice anyway. I moved back to Houston, slept on the living room couch on Live Oak Street, changed bandages, cooked soft foods, drove her to physical therapy 3 times a week. The house smelled the same as it had 9 years earlier. Old wood, coffee, the faint mustiness of a window unit that never quite dried the air out. And some mornings I'd wake up on that couch disoriented, half convinced I was 24 again, waiting for a sentence that would tell me who I was allowed to become. My father and Lamar were barely present. When she recovered, they threw a small gathering and thanked the whole family for pulling together. My name wasn't mentioned once. Helping my mother sort old boxes not long after, I found her ancient handheld recorder and pressed play out of curiosity. My father's voice, recorded months earlier. "Just let Kiara stay home and take care of her. At least she's good for something. If she ever makes something of herself later, we'll still have somewhere to land." I sat on the edge of my mother's bed for 10 minutes without moving, the recorder still warm in my palm, its small red light blinking steadily, like it had no idea what it had just handed me. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked, and I remember counting it without meaning to. The way you count something just to have somewhere to put your attention when your mind refuses to. Then I copied the recording onto my own phone. Looking back, I can see the shape of those years clearly, the way you can only see a storm once you're standing on the other side of it. First they took my money, then my labor, then my sacrifice, and erased every bit of it before the thank you cards were printed. Kiara gave up a California salary and 3 sleepless months to nurse the mother who never once said thank you. Team loyalty or team boundaries? Which one do you choose? The day Forbes released the list, my office erupted. Someone put my name up on the conference room screen, and for 2 hours I let myself feel something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Proud. The screen glowed white-blue against the far wall, my name in bold block letters above a number that still didn't feel real no matter how many times I read it. Someone popped a bottle of sparkling cider because it was still a Tuesday and there was work to finish by 5. My assistant kept touching my shoulder like she needed to confirm I was solid, actually standing there, actually the person on the screen. Through the window behind the podium, downtown Houston stretched out gold and hazy in the late afternoon light. The same skyline I used to see only from the outside, pressing my face to a bus window on my way to a night shift that paid $9 an hour. For one strange, suspended second, standing in the middle of all that noise, I thought of the ceiling fan on Live Oak Street, clicking every third rotation, and how far that sound now felt from anything in this room. I let myself have that thought. I didn't push it away like I usually did. I'd earned 2 hours of simply feeling good, and I intended to spend every minute of it. 2 hours. That's how long it lasted before my mother called, her voice shaking. "Baby, we just saw the news. We're so proud. Your father and I want to see you." I stood by the window with the phone pressed to my ear, watching the traffic crawl along the freeway 30 floors below, tiny and silent from that height. And I felt my pulse do something complicated, quicken, then still, then quicken again. I should tell you, some old, tired part of me almost hung up. But another part, the part that had spent 9 years wondering if this day would come, wanted just once to believe success had finally opened a door loyalty never could. I gave them my address. I spent the rest of that afternoon unable to focus on anything. I signed off on 3 contracts I barely remembered reading. Around 6, I left the office early, which I never did, and drove home with the radio off, just the hum of tires on pavement and my own thoughts, circling. At home, I stood in my kitchen for a long time before doing anything else. I poured a glass of water I didn't drink. I straightened a stack of mail that didn't need straightening. In the bottom drawer of my desk, without quite deciding to, I found myself pulling out the old envelope, the one with the will, Lamar's note, the screenshots, the recording, and running my thumb along its soft, worn edge before sliding it back into place. I told myself it was habit. Some part of me, quieter and more honest, knew it was preparation. I didn't examine that part too closely that night. I just closed the drawer and went to shower and change, the way you might dress carefully for a meeting you're telling yourself is only a formality. I caught my own reflection in the mirror while fixing an earring and paused. For a moment, I didn't see the woman on the Forbes list. I saw a 24-year-old at a kitchen table, waiting to be told she'd amount to something. I made myself hold that reflection's gaze until it steadied. You already know how this could go, I thought. Let them show you who they are tonight, and believe it. They didn't come to my office. They came to my penthouse in River Oaks. When the elevator doors opened, my father stood there in an old suit, my mother beside him holding grocery store flowers, Lamar behind them, then Shanice, then 2 children I'd once rocked to sleep for 3 straight weeks, looking at me now like a stranger. The elevator chimed softly before the doors slid apart, and for a half second everyone just stood there in the frame of it, blinking in the brighter light of the hallway, like actors who'd forgotten their opening line. My father's suit was the same one he'd worn to Lamar's college graduation years ago, the shoulders slightly too loose now, like he'd shrunk inside it without noticing. My mother's flowers were already drooping at the stems, plastic wrap crinkling every time her hand trembled. Lamar wouldn't quite meet my eyes. He kept glancing sideways at his father, the same way he had at 20, waiting to see how he was supposed to react before reacting. Shanice held both children's hands a little too tightly, and I noticed, even in that first second, that her eyes moved past me to take in the hallway, the finishes, the space itself, with the quick, assessing look of someone doing arithmetic. Right before I opened the door, my phone buzzed, a text from a number I didn't recognize. They're not here to apologize. They brought new loan paperwork. I saw it on Lamar's desk. S. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second too long. Somewhere down the hall, an air vent clicked on, a low mechanical breath that felt, in that moment, unbearably loud. It was Shanice. I'd learn later exactly why she sent it. Not loyalty to me, but calculation for herself. She had 2 children of her own now, and she'd watched what this family did to the people who ran out of usefulness. She wasn't protecting me. She was making sure that whatever happened next, she wasn't standing on the wrong side of it. I opened the door anyway. My father looked around at the marble floors, the skyline behind me, and said the sentence that made the air go still. "You've made it now. It's time you helped this family." He said it too quickly, I remember thinking, the words arriving before his eyes had even finished moving across the room, like he'd rehearsed the sentence on the drive over and simply needed a surface to land it on. My mother's hand tightened around the flowers. A petal dropped onto the marble, and neither of us moved to pick it up. I looked at my niece and nephew, 4 years old, staring at me with the polite curiosity of children who'd been told I was their aunt, but had no memory of ever loving me. The little girl tilted her head at me the exact way Lamar used to as a toddler, and something in my chest twisted at the resemblance, proof of blood I recognized even in a stranger's face. I thought of the 3 weeks I'd spent rocking her to sleep, humming the same tune my grandmother once hummed to me, and understood, with a small private ache, that none of it had left a single mark on her. She was looking at me the way you look at a nice hotel lobby, impressed, unattached. Every quiet fix I'd made for this family came rushing back at once. Every hour with an accountant, every call begging a creditor for patience, every time I told my mother, "It'll be okay," because that was easier than the truth, that I was the one holding it together while everyone else got to fall apart. Nobody had ever once asked if I was tired. For 9 years, some quiet, stubborn part of me had kept a single hope alive, that if I built something undeniable enough, they would finally walk through my door to see me, not what I could give them. Standing there, watching my father's eyes measure my marble floors instead of my face, that hope didn't break loudly. It just went quiet, the way a light goes out when you finally stop needing it on. What I felt wasn't rage. It was a strange relief of finally understanding I'd been waiting on something that was never coming. I stepped back and said, calm and steady, "Come in, sit down." I closed the door behind them and felt something other than fear settle into my body for the first time in that family's presence. I felt ready. They thought they were walking in to collect a reward. They had no idea I'd spent 9 years preparing the bill. I asked everyone to sit in my living room. No tea, no water. I wasn't going to be the one taking care of the room this time. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind me had gone from gold to deep blue while we'd been standing in the foyer, and now the city lights were coming up one by one, like the room itself was holding its breath along with us. Nobody moved to sit at first. My father lowered himself into the armchair the way a man lowers himself into cold water, slow, bracing. My mother perched on the very edge of the couch, knees pressed together, the grocery store flowers still in her lap, already wilting at the stems. Lamar stood by the window with his hands jammed in his pockets. Shanice sat the twins down on the rug with a coloring book, murmured something low in their ears, and I noticed, the way you notice a held breath, that she positioned herself closest to the door. I opened my laptop and put it on the screen above the fireplace. Bank statements, the co-signed loan with my name on it, years of transfers I'd made without ever being thanked. The blue light from the screen washed over all their faces at once. And for a second, nobody said anything. The only sound was the soft click of the trackpad under my finger, and somewhere below us, the muffled hush of River Oaks traffic 30 floors down. I let the first page sit there longer than it needed to. I wanted them to read every line themselves before I said a word. Then I pulled up the next document slowly. My grandmother's original will, leaving me the house on Live Oak Street when I turned 21. Beside it, paperwork my attorney had pulled from the county recorder's office. A home equity loan taken out against that house 2 years later. My signature on it forged. the funds wired out within days of Lamar's wedding. My father's face went pale. My mother started to cry. "You forged my signature," I said, my voice level, because the evidence didn't need my anger to do its work. "You took out a loan against my grandmother's house, and you used the money for a wedding I wasn't even invited to." Nobody answered. My father's jaw worked once, twice, like he was chewing on a denial he couldn't quite swallow whole. My mother's hand found his knee and gripped it, not for comfort. I recognized that grip. It was the same one she used to give him under this exact kitchen table 9 years ago, right before he said something he couldn't take back. This time it didn't stop him from saying nothing at all. I reached into a drawer and pulled out an old envelope, soft at the corners from 9 years of being carried from one hiding place to another. Inside was a copy of the will, and beneath it, a note in Lamar's 20-year-old handwriting. I saw the paperwork. I didn't say anything because I was scared they'd throw me out. I set it on the table. The paper made almost no sound against the glass, but in that room it might as well have been a gunshot. Lamar went white. "I didn't know you kept that," he said. He stood up and the chair legs scraped against the hardwood, a short, ugly noise that seemed to embarrass even him, his voice cracking. "I knew. I've known for years. They told me to keep quiet. I kept quiet too long." He turned to our parents. "You ruined both of us." The room went so silent I could hear the air conditioning humming. Shanice's hand tightened around her daughter's shoulder, guiding both children's attention back down to the coloring book, shielding them from whatever was about to come next, the way you'd shield a child's eyes from headlights. Lamar's whole life had been built on one bargain he never chose. Stay the favorite, stay silent, and the house of cards stays standing. His silence was never really loyalty to our parents. It was fear, plain and simple, of becoming the discarded one instead of me. Seeing his own handwriting on that table broke something louder than guilt. It was the first time being the good son cost him more than staying quiet ever had. For a moment, nobody in that room looked like the family I remembered. My father, usually so certain of himself, sat with his hands flat on his thighs, staring at a spot on the rug like it might tell him what to say. I thought, briefly, of the kitchen on Live Oak Street, how he'd once filled every silence with certainty, and how strange it was to watch him run out of it, in a room I owned and he didn't. "I'm not here for revenge," I said quietly. "I'm just done being the one who gets taken from." I refused every request for money. I handed Lamar a card for a real re-entry program for entrepreneurs, one my own company helped fund. Real help, not another loan with my name on it. He took it with both hands, like it weighed more than paper should. Then, to my parents, "You can be proud of me from a distance. That's the only closeness I have left to give you tonight." Before they left, I set one more thing on the table. A folded, yellowed note I'd carried in my wallet since I was 16. Words my grandmother wrote me not long before she passed. "If your parents ever treat you unfairly, remember, you are not the one who's wrong." My mother read it and her hands shook so badly the paper trembled audibly against her palm. She pressed it to her chest and sobbed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere much older than that living room. My father stared at the floor, and for the first time in my life, I watched him look small. One by one, they stood and walked out. Nobody said goodbye. I stood at the door after it closed and listened to the elevator chime, then the hum of it descending, carrying them away floor by floor. I didn't move for a long moment. The penthouse felt enormous and quiet around me, the city lights outside still burning steady, indifferent to everything that had just happened 30 feet from the window. I picked up the grocery store flowers my mother had left behind on the couch, still wrapped in cellophane, and stood there holding them, not sure yet whether to throw them away or put them in water. In the end, I put them in water. Some habits of tenderness don't leave you, even when the people who taught them to you have. They walked out of my penthouse believing this drama family confrontation was over. It wasn't, because 3 months later, my phone rang again, and this time, it was Lamar. I almost didn't pick up. 3 months of silence had passed. 3 months where I'd finally started sleeping through the night, without checking my phone for a text I both dreaded and half hoped for. Those 3 months had a shape of their own, quieter than anything that came before. I went back to a rhythm I hadn't let myself have in years. Coffee on the balcony before sunrise, the city still half asleep below me, the sky over Houston turning that particular shade of gray-pink it only holds for a few minutes before the heat sets in. I started saying yes to things that had nothing to do with proving myself to anyone. A slow Sunday, a book I read for no reason, a phone call with a friend that wasn't about money or damage control. I noticed, somewhere in that stretch of ordinary mornings, that the tightness I'd carried in my shoulders for 9 years had started, very slowly, to loosen. I still thought about that penthouse night more than I let on. Sometimes at odd hours, waiting for an elevator, standing in line at a coffee shop, I'd catch myself replaying my father's face when the loan papers came up on the screen, and I'd feel something that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite grief. It was closer to the feeling of setting down something heavy after carrying it so long your arms had forgotten what empty felt like. Something in me answered anyway. Lamar's voice was steadier than I'd ever heard it. There was noise behind him, the metallic clang of something being set down, a radio playing low, men's voices calling back and forth in the easy shorthand of people who work with their hands. He'd taken a job with a construction company near Sugar Land, working his way up, paying down his own debts for the first time in his adult life. He wasn't calling to ask for anything. He just wanted me to know. "I wake up at 5 now," he said, and I could hear something almost like pride creeping into his voice. Careful, like he wasn't sure yet if he'd earned the right to it. Feels different, earning something instead of just inheriting the mess of it. Before we hung up, he said something that made me go quiet. "I recorded the whole conversation that night at your place. I've got a few older ones too, from years back. If they ever try to pressure you again, I'll hand it all over." I didn't ask why he'd kept them. Some part of me already understood. The same part of me that had kept a phone, a screenshot, a recording, an envelope. We'd both learned the same lesson, at different tables, in different years, and neither of us had ever said it out loud until now. I just said, "Thank you." A few days later, he sent an old photograph. The two of us on the front steps of the house on Live Oak Street. Me, 12 years old, my arm around his shoulders, both of us squinting into a sun that must have been setting behind whoever was holding the camera. The edges of the photo were soft and worn pale from handling, the way photographs get when somebody keeps pulling them out of a drawer to look at them and then putting them carefully back. On the back, our grandmother's handwriting, faded to a soft brown. "Kiara is going to fly higher than all of them." I cried that day, not from pain, but because for the first time in longer than I could remember, someone in my family was standing beside me instead of taking from me. My parents still texted occasionally. I answered politely, briefly, and never opened my door to them again. Not to punish them, but because I finally understood that keeping a door open doesn't heal what's broken on the other side of it. It just gives the same hand another chance to reach through. One of those texts, easy to miss among the others, mentioned almost in passing that the house on Live Oak Street needed a new roof, that money was tight, that they were figuring something out. I read it twice, felt the old reflex rise in my chest, the urge to fix, to wire money, to make the problem disappear before anyone had to sit with it. And then I set the phone down and went back to what I'd been doing. I didn't know yet what figuring something out would come to mean. I only knew, reading it, that some quiet part of me had learned to wait and watch instead of rushing in. I started mentoring young Black girls at community centers around 3rd Ward, telling them what nobody told me. Being underestimated by the people who should love you most isn't proof of what you're worth. It's only proof of what they were never taught to see. There was one girl, 16, sharp-eyed and guarded in a way I recognized instantly, who told me after our second session that her own mother called her the difficult one in front of company. I didn't tell her it would stop hurting. I told her it would stop being the only voice she heard about herself, and that this, the two of us in a folding chair circle in a church basement on a Tuesday night, was the beginning of a second voice. Lamar's change didn't happen all at once. There were setbacks, discouraged calls, nights he wondered if he'd ever undo what he and our parents had built together. I didn't rescue him from those nights. I just listened and reminded him that undoing it was still his to do. Some evenings, I wondered whether my parents would find some new way to reach back into the life I'd built. 9 years of taking doesn't undo itself just because the person they took from finally said no. I was right to wonder, because one final letter was still coming, and it would ask me for something I'd have to decide, once and for all, whether I was still willing to give. 1 year after Forbes released that list, I stood on the rooftop of the J.P. Morgan Chase Tower, looking out over Houston at night. 100,000 lights beneath me, the same city that once watched me stand alone in the rain with nothing but a backpack and a promise. The wind up there was different from street level, steadier, cooler, carrying the faint smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. I'd taken to coming up here alone some nights, not to celebrate anything, just to remember, on purpose, who I used to be before I let myself forget how far back that person stood. A handwritten letter arrived from my mother that week. I recognized her handwriting before I even opened the envelope. The same looping M she'd taught me to write my own name with, decades ago, at that same kitchen table. No request for money, just a few lines. I was wrong. I wish I could go back. But I understand you don't need me anymore. You've become the kind of woman I never had the courage to be myself. I read it standing in my kitchen, and I noticed my hand had gone still against the counter, like it wasn't sure whether to set the letter down gently or not at all. I folded it and set it in a drawer. Some things deserve to sit with you a while before you decide what to do with them. 2 weeks later, my lawyer called. His voice had the particular flatness lawyers use when they're about to tell you something they already know will hurt. The title search he'd run for the earlier fraud case had turned up something new. My parents had recently taken out a second loan against the Live Oak Street house, this time using my late grandmother's name on the paperwork, layering fresh debt on top of the fraud they'd never repaid. The bank was preparing to foreclose. Along with the lawyer's call came one more letter, begging me to step in and save the house. You don't owe them this, he said, before I'd even asked. Legally, morally, either way, I just need to know what you want to do. I asked him to give me a day. That evening, I drove out to 3rd Ward alone, without telling anyone, and parked across the street from the house on Live Oak Street. I didn't go in, I just sat there with the engine off, windows down, listening to the same dog bark somewhere down the block that had been barking the night I made my promise in the rain 9 years ago. Or one exactly like it, in the way that certain sounds in a neighborhood never really change, even when everything else does. The porch light was on. Someone had left a rocking chair out front, empty, rocking slightly in the breeze. I thought about my grandmother on that porch, humming while she folded laundry she'd carried home from her hospital shift. And I thought about the promise she'd made when she put my name on that deed, that I'd always have a place to call home, whatever else happened to me. I sat with my desk lamp on late that night, going through the same old envelope I'd carried for 9 years, and found, tucked behind the will, a photograph I hadn't looked at in years. My grandmother on that same porch, laughing at something out of frame, one hand shading her eyes from the sun. I ran my thumb along the edge of it and let myself sit with the ache of missing her, clean and uncomplicated, the one grief in this whole story that had never once asked anything of me. The next morning, I sat at my desk with a pen and a blank check in front of me, enough to clear the debt twice over without denting anything I'd built. I thought about that kitchen table on Live Oak Street, the ceiling fan clicking overhead, the rain against the window the night my father told me I'd never amount to anything. I thought about the porch light left on for no one. I thought about my grandmother's voice on that old recorder, promising me a place to land, and how that promise had been used against me instead of for me for 9 straight years. I signed the check. Then, in front of my lawyer, I tore it in half. He didn't say anything at first. He just watched the 2 halves settle on the desk, then looked up at me, and something in his face, not quite surprise, more like recognition, told me he understood exactly what he'd just witnessed wasn't hesitation. It was a decision, already made, arriving at its final form. This isn't my responsibility anymore, I said. At the penthouse 3 months earlier, saying no to them had still felt like a fight, a boundary I had to defend. This was different. There was no anger left to spend. My deepest fear, the one I never said out loud even to myself, was that saving them one more time would quietly pull me back into the only role this family ever gave me, the fixer, the one who absorbs the damage so everyone else gets to keep pretending. Tearing that check wasn't punishment. It was the last thread of that old identity, finally, deliberately cut. I understood, finally, that the greatest victory of my life wasn't a number on a magazine list. It was the ability to look back at my whole past and choose not to rescue the people who once let me drown. I'm still alone, in the sense that my family, as I once knew it, doesn't gather around one table anymore. But this time, the aloneness is something I chose, not something done to me. It took me a long time to understand the difference. Lamar still calls every few weeks, steady now, building something real. Last time, he told me he'd started keeping a photo of the twins on his dashboard, so he'd remember, on the hard mornings, exactly who he was building toward. My mother's letters still arrive, and someday I imagine I'll write back, not out of obligation, but because forgiveness, when it finally comes, deserves to come on its own terms, not as a rescue mission wearing love's face. The 16-year-old girl from the community center called me the week after the foreclosure letter to tell me she'd gotten into a summer program she'd been too afraid to apply for. She asked me, almost shyly, if I remembered telling her that being underestimated wasn't proof of her worth. I told her I remembered every word because I'd needed someone to say it to me once too, and nobody had. This story reminds us that favoritism doesn't only wound the child who was overlooked. It slowly hollows out the child who was overindulged too, until neither one is left whole. If you're sitting in your kitchen tonight, still carrying a debt or a grudge that was never supposed to be yours, here's something practical, not poetic. Pick one boundary, just one, write it on an index card, and tape it inside a cabinet door where you'll see it every morning. Something as simple as, I will not co-sign anything for anyone again. Call your bank this week and ask directly whether your name is attached to anyone else's account. And if it is, ask what it takes to remove it. This month, not someday. If certain family dinners leave you feeling smaller instead of loved, it's all right to trade one of them for coffee with the neighbor who actually remembers to ask how your knees are doing. And when a letter arrives asking you to fix a mess you didn't make, you're allowed to fold it, set it in a drawer, and answer tomorrow, or never at all. Love, at any age, was never supposed to cost you your peace.